This is a homily for the feast of the Epiphany. The first reading is from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 60, verses 1 to 6. The responsorial psalm is from Psalm 71 in the Septuagint or 72 in the Hebrew Bible. And the Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. Epiphany is a Greek word that means literally a shining forth. Our English word epiphany makes its first appearance in the language sometime around 1310. It's spelt with a capital E, and it's used to refer exclusively to today's feast. But by about 1650, the word appears spelt with a lowercase e, and it's used to refer to other manifestations of Christ, but also to appearances of divine beings in other religions. So the story we heard last Sunday, the presentation of the Lord in the temple, could be called an epiphany. Simeon and Anna both recognized that in the little baby brought to the temple by Joseph and Mary, there was a revelation of the divine presence, a shining forth. Since the 19th century, the meaning of epiphany has expanded even further. We now use the word to refer to what might be called a light bulb or eureka experience. In other words, a moment of sudden and great revelation or realization. But this moment of enlightenment so often occurs while we're doing something very ordinary, like Archimedes' great moment of discovery while he was having a bath. As you're aware, we have 4 Gospels. Mark wrote his Gospel sometime between 65 and 75 AD, and Matthew and Luke wrote their Gospels between 80 and 90 AD. The Gospel of John was written sometime between 80 and 110 AD. Mark's Gospel begins with the proclamation of John the Baptist, the baptism of Jesus, and the testing in the desert. Mark tells the reader nothing about the events surrounding the birth of Jesus, not even the name of his father Joseph. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke both have infancy narratives. John's Gospel begins with a prologue, followed by John the Baptist's testimony about Jesus, and then we have the call of the first disciples. John also tells us nothing about Jesus' birth, not even the name of his mother Mary. The infancy narratives in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke function something like an orchestral overture. The evangelists sound notes that will resonate throughout the Gospel. It is generally agreed among New Testament scholars that Matthew and Luke wrote independently of each other without knowing the other's work. Matthew's account focuses on Joseph, while Luke's infancy narrative focuses primarily on Mary. Despite a number of differences in the two narratives, Matthew and Luke agree on the key points. Mary and Joseph are legally married, but they have not yet come to live together as man and wife. Mary conceives by the power of the Holy Spirit, not through intercourse with her husband. Joseph is of Davidic descent. An angel announces the birth of the child and says that the child is to be named Jesus. The angel also states that Jesus is to be Saviour. Jesus is born in Bethlehem, by which time Mary and Joseph are living together as husband and wife. Herod the Great is king of Judea when the child is born. We know that Herod died in 4 BC. And finally, Jesus is brought up in Nazareth. The anomaly that Jesus was born at least 4 years before Christ results from an ancient mistake in calculating the year of his birth. In 533 AD, a monk, mathematician and astronomer by the name of Dionysius Exiguus, or Dennis the Short in English, devised a calendar that no longer numbered the years from the foundation of Rome, ab urbe condita, or AUC for short, but from the birth of the Lord, Anno Domini. He mistakenly chose 754 AUC as AD 1, a date at least 4 years too late, since Herod died in 750 AUC. So when was Jesus born? New Testament scholar Raymond Brown comes to this conclusion. A birth of Jesus dated 2 years before the death of Herod in 4 BC would be consonant with the information in Luke chapter 3 verse 23 that Jesus was about 30 years of age in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, a year reckoned at October AD 27 to October AD 28. The mood of Matthew and Luke's narratives is quite different. Luke's account is filled with joy. Hymns filled with joy are sung by Mary, the Magnificat, Zechariah, the Benedictus, angels in the night sky, the Gloria in excelsis Deo, and Simeon, the Nunc Dimittis. The tone of Matthew's infancy narrative is dark and threatening, dominated by Herod and his plot to kill the infant Jesus. Popular piety has merged the stories of Matthew and Luke together, something that is very evident in the nativity scenes such as these. Here we have Jesus born in a stable, with both shepherds and Magi present. The Magi appear only in Matthew's Gospel, and the shepherds are found only in Luke's Gospel. In both Gospels, Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Matthew doesn't tell us precisely where in Bethlehem Jesus was born, but chapter 2 verse 11 suggests that the birthplace was the house where Mary and Joseph lived. In Luke's Gospel, Mary and Joseph are living in Nazareth, and they make the journey to Bethlehem because of the census that was being taken. Because Joseph was of the house of David, he was obliged to return to his own city, Bethlehem. While they were there, Jesus was born. There is no room for Mary and Joseph in the Kataluma, which was a place where travellers would normally find lodging. So Mary gives birth to her child in a manger, suggesting a barn or stall for the housing of animals. Our popular nativity scenes usually portray the newly born child laid in a manger, with shepherds and Magi in attendance. The story of the Magi is found only in Matthew's Gospel, and it is told in 6 short scenes. Scenes 1, 2 and 3 are set in Jerusalem, and scenes 4, 5 and 6 are set in Bethlehem. In scene 1, the Magi come from the east to Judea, looking for the King of the Jews. So first of all, who are the Magi? The Greek word that Matthew uses is magos. Magos is the singular and magoi is the plural. That's why we traditionally call them Magi. And that, by the way, is where we get our English words magic and magician. The word was originally Persian, and refer to the priestly caste of Zoroastrianism. However, by the time that Matthew was writing, the Greek word magos had outgrown its Persian origins and was understood more widely than a Persian priestly caste. It referred to people who were astronomers and astrologers. In the 21st century, we dismiss astrology as superstition, and we accept astronomy as a legitimate branch of science. But such a clear-cut distinction didn't exist in the ancient world. Magi also referred to people who could interpret dreams. Where did they come from? Matthew simply says they came from the east. Matthew's Greek says apo anatolon, which means literally from the rising, that is, from where the sun rises, which means the east. So where is that? Well, Matthew doesn't tell us, and I'm sure he'd be amused by our attempts over the centuries to pinpoint precisely where the Magi came from. There was no consensus among early Christian writers. Great scholars such as Clement of Alexandria, John Chrysostom, Leo the Great, and Cyril of Jerusalem opted for Persia. And that tradition is reflected in an ancient mosaic in the Basilica of Sant Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna. Inside the basilica we find a mosaic of the wise men, commissioned by the Roman Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. The costumes they are wearing are Persian. Notice also that they are named in the mosaic: Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. Jerome and Augustine took the position that the Magi were from Babylon, and Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Cyprian of Carthage, and Clement of Rome opted for Arabia. Although Arabia is to the southeast of the Holy Land, it was referred to as the East. For Matthew, the more important point is that these wise men from the East were obviously not Jews. So in chapter 2 of his Gospel, he's sounding a note that will resound throughout the Gospel. Gentile wise men are seeking the King of the Jews, but the Jewish leadership seems uninterested. At the very end of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus commissions his disciples to go forth and make disciples of all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So at the beginning of the Gospel, Gentile wise men come seeking Jesus. At the end of the Gospel, Jesus sends his disciples out to all nations. The Magi come seeking the King of the Jews. That certainly startled King Herod. There is historical evidence that Herod was pathologically insecure and insanely suspicious. He was cruel and vicious, and paranoid about his claim upon the throne, since he did not come from David's line. He ruthlessly eliminated potential rivals, including 3 of his sons, Alexander, Aristobulus, and Antipater, accusing them of trying to kill him. The Roman Emperor Augustus once commented on Herod's brutality when he said that it is safer to be Herod's pig than his son. He was punning on the similarity in Greek between the word for pig, hus, and son, huios. So in scene 2, when Herod hears of a potential rival, he asks the chief priests and scribes where the Messiah is to be born. Herod's own wise men answer the question immediately: Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, quoting the prophet Micah. Notice, There are two sets of wise men in this story, the Magi and the chief priests and scribes. The Magi have travelled a great distance to find the newly born king of the Jews. Herod's wise men do nothing, even though Bethlehem is just down the road, 10 kilometres to the south of Jerusalem. By road today, a trip of 14 kilometres and about 27 minutes by car. But they don't budge. Perhaps they're fearful of anything that will profoundly alter the course of their lives. I have in mind the words of the poet W.H. Auden from The Age of Anxiety. We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. And of course we can all be guilty of that. In scene 3, Herod passes the information he has received from the chief priests and scribes to the Magi and asks for their cooperation. Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage. One of the underlying motifs of Matthew's Gospel is that of Jesus as a new and greater Moses, who has come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. One of the many parallels between the Exodus story and the Gospel story is the way in which Matthew's account of the visit of the Magi echoes the story of Balaam, recounted in the book of Numbers, chapters 22 to 24. In that story, a king, Balak, seeks to use a foreign magus, Balaam. As the Israelites journey towards the promised land, they approach the kingdom of Moab. Balak, the king of Moab, feared the Israelites and sought to destroy them. To accomplish his purpose, Balak summons a famous seer named Balaam to put a curse upon Israel. The Jewish writer Philo refers to Balaam as a magus. In the words of Raymond Brown, Balaam foiled the hostile plans of King Balak by delivering oracles that foretold the future greatness of Israel and the rise of its royal ruler. In other words, the wicked king sought to use the foreign magus to destroy his enemy, but the magus actually honoured his enemy. Obviously, this is very close to the story of Herod and the Magi. In scene 4, the Magi emerge from the shadow of Herod and follow a star to Bethlehem. Bethlehem was, of course, David's own birthplace, and Matthew presents Jesus as the son of David. Matthew's Gospel begins with the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, beginning with Abraham. This is important. For Matthew, the origin of Jesus Christ starts with Abraham begetting Isaac. In other words, the story of the Hebrew patriarchs, of the kings of Judah, and of other Israelites is the opening stage of the story of Jesus Christ. Matthew tells us, the sum of the generations is therefore 14 from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian deportation, and 14 from the Babylonian deportation to Christ. So, there were 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the Babylonian deportation, and 14 generations from the Babylonian deportation to the birth of Jesus, who was called the Messiah. The ancient Hebrews did not use Arabic numerals as we do. Letters of the Hebrew alphabet had a numerical value. The name David consists of 3 consonants, Daleth or D, Vav or V, and Daleth again. Daleth is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, so it has the value of 4. Vav is the 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, so it has the numerical value of 6. Ancient Hebrew, by the way, was written without vowels. So if you add up the numerical value of the 3 letters in the name David, you get 14. So the whole structure of the genealogy is Matthew's way of telling us that the long story of Abraham's people will come to its fulfillment with a new David, who will rescue his people from their exile. That is, he will save his people from their sins. In scene 5, the Magi's long journey ends as they enter the house, find the child with Mary his mother, and fall down in worship. They offer the child precious gifts. The gifts are gold, frankincense, and myrrh, although Matthew doesn't tell us if these gifts have any special significance. However, some commentators see gold as a symbol of kingship. This child is the infant king of the Jews. Incense symbolizes divinity, and myrrh is used to anoint a dead body. So this child will be victorious through suffering and death. John's Gospel tells us quite explicitly that when Jesus is taken down from the cross, Nicodemus had brought with him a mixture of myrrh and aloes. Now you will have noticed that Matthew never calls the Magi kings, nor does he tell us how many Magi there were. Christian tradition seems to have settled on 3 Magi, and that no doubt comes from the fact that there were 3 gifts. How, though, did they become kings? As Christians read the story of the visit of the Magi, other biblical texts sprang to mind. Firstly, the prophet Isaiah, chapter 60, verses 1 to 6. This is, in fact, the first reading for today's Mass. There we read, "The nations come to your light, and kings to your dawning brightness, bringing gold and incense, and singing the praise of the Lord." Now, although Matthew doesn't use this as a fulfillment text in his Gospel, it is hovering around in the background, especially with the explicit mention of gifts of gold and incense. The second text that springs to mind is Psalm 72, today's responsorial psalm. It's Psalm 72 in the Hebrew Bible and Psalm 71 in the Septuagint Bible. Here again we have kings. The kings of Tarshish and the seacoast shall pay him tribute. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall bring him gifts. Before him all kings shall fall prostrate. All nations shall serve him. Again, kings bringing gifts, and Gentile kings. Tarshish is in Spain, Sheba is in Yemen, and Seba in Ethiopia. Keep in mind that Matthew begins his Gospel with the genealogy of Jesus, the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David. Note that Solomon was the most famous of David's sons, and his successor as king. In the first book of the Kings, chapter 10, we have the story of the Queen of Sheba visiting King Solomon. We're told that she came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she had observed his wisdom, she said, "The report was true that I heard in my own land of your accomplishments and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it." Later, in Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 12, Jesus refers to this scene from the book of Kings when he says, "The Queen of the South came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And see, there is something greater than Solomon here." So Matthew's story of the Magi, set against the backdrop of Isaiah chapter 60, Psalm 71, and the first book of the Kings, is telling us, here in this child, there is someone far greater than Solomon. Here we have the true Son of David, and in him the glory of God now appears. In scene 6, the Magi leave Bethlehem, being warned in a dream not to return to Herod. T.S. Eliot's poem Journey of the Magi offers an interesting reflection on the inner journey of the Magi. Once they had returned home, the Magi reflect upon what had happened. "This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We return to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods." Having encountered the infant king of the Jews, their former worldview had crumbled, and they are no longer at home in the old dispensation. The experience of the Magi, the experience of letting go of a familiar way of life, is captured by Judith Virost in her bestseller entitled Necessary Losses. She writes, "Losses are a part of life, universal, unavoidable, inexorable. And these losses are necessary because we grow by losing and leaving and letting go. Passionate investment leaves us vulnerable to loss. And sometimes, no matter how clever we are, we must lose. But it is only through our losses that we become fully developed human beings." Unlike the chief priests and scribes, the Magi were vulnerable to loss. They embarked upon a journey into the unknown, not knowing where it might lead, what they might find, or how it might change their lives. For all of us, the ultimate journey, the ultimate human quest, is for the divine. St. Augustine wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Father Ronald Roldheiser offers this reflection upon Augustine's words. When Augustine says, "You have made us for yourself, Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you," he is, of course, pointing out the reason why God would have made us this way. And, as his prayer indicates, the ultimate value of longing lies precisely in its incessant nature. By never letting us rest with anything less than the infinite and eternal, it guarantees that we will seek God or be frustrated.